What's up guys, RJ Mutton here at the AvidMax studio for a guest edition of Fly Tying Tuesdays. I'm a fly fisherman, fly tyer, photographer, and artist from the Denver area, and I've been fly fishing, tying flies, and drawing trout for over 30 years. This is the second of two Stillwater patterns I'm going to be tying today called the Adult Booby Damsel. If you like the fly, you can find the materials here in the shop or at avidmax.com. Let's get right to it. Now you'll see here that I've tried to imitate the natural as close as I can. They sort of have wings that are facing backwards. They tend to have a long tail that's flashy but tiger striped, usually in blue. They tend to have a pretty small front portion of the body and pretty big eyes. And then they tend to have, sort of like small tentacle-like arms coming off the front of the fly. And I sort of came up with this pattern to imitate the natural as much as I can, but also keeping in mind that it's got to float and ride in the film the right way once you lay down the fly. So let's go ahead and drop this off here and take a look at how to tie the pattern. So we're actually going to start with a little bit of prep work before we add our hook here. And the first thing we're going to do is work on the tail. So I actually found this material at a craft store. You can either get it on Etsy or on Amazon. And it's called either twisted tinsel cord or braided tinsel. It's kind of a unique material. I'm surprised that none of the fly tying companies have picked it up yet, but I have a feeling you'll be seeing this on shelves really soon. So it's probably the only material that I'm going to tie with today that you can't purchase at AvidMax, but that's kind of the beauty of it. When you're trying to tie strange candy, I certainly encourage all of you to find materials that people aren't using all the time. And sometimes that will make the difference in getting that take or not, especially with selective fish. So we're first going to work on the tail here. You'll notice on the naturals that they do have a little bit of ribbing. What I do is I take a Post-it note sheet and sort of lay out nice even swatches of Sharpie so that I can know where to start to mark up my tail and make sure that ribbing is nice and even between each point where I color the material. So just sort of start hitting the material with the Sharpie as you go across here, using your little striping that you've already created on your Post-it note as a proxy for where to put those markings. And that will make for a nice natural, nice even marked up tail once you're done. So you sort of do one side, take the material, flip it over, lay it back down, and start to mark it up again. So I like to do both sides of it and then the top side of the material so that you can see that tiger striping or that ribbing from all angles when you're looking at the fly. And one thing that you see in nature is a lot of symmetry, right? You don't see tiger striping that's not nice and even. In naturals and ribbing and bugs and all of that, there's a lot of symmetry to all of it. So where you can use tools to create symmetry in the materials that you're tying or where you're coloring things in with Sharpie, it's important to try to do that so that you try to stick to what's occurring in nature. So once we get this material marked up, you can sort of spin it around, see if there's any spots where it might need a little bit of additional marking. And we can move on to the next part of prepping this tail. So what I'm going to do from here is actually take some of this this is Solar Res UV Cure color resin in black. And it's actually a small little canister. And it's got a little paintbrush on it. So we'll pull the paintbrush out, pull some of the material off, but you want to leave a little dab of that on the end of the paintbrush. We'll go ahead and hit this tail a little bit with it, as you can see here. And this is just going to build some durability into the fly, but if you do look at the naturals, they often have a little bit of a rounded point to the tail, just like this creates. And it is often the color black at the tip of the tail, so that's really what we're trying to mimic here. So we'll go ahead and hit that with our UV light. This is a Loon UV flashlight, but really any brand works. Just give it a couple seconds to cure. Just like I've said before, you really want to make sure that you're not looking directly at that UV light, as it can hurt your eyes. So either cover it with your hands or look away a little bit. Once you've given that a second to cure, we're actually going to add a little bit of this Loon UV resin in clear thin as well to cover up that the color material. What I find is that the clear resins do finish a little bit better than the colored ones. So anywhere where you're adding sort of a red, black, pink, orange colored UV, it can be a good idea to put a thin layer of that clear over it just to really solidify that material and build in the durability that you're going for. So as you can see, we've got a nice little rounded tip. We've got a black rib tail, and that material is prepped. So we'll put that off to the side. Another thing we're going to use here is these new Hemingway Stonefly wings. Pretty neat material. I just purchased this recently from AvidMax to upgrade the wings on this fly. So you are sort of seeing a 2.0 version of this Adult Booby Damsel. What I like to do is go ahead and clip off 2 of the wings by cutting out the plastic. And that way you keep the rest of the material intact for when you want to tie other flies with it later. And the way this comes, it's sort of in a thin piece of plastic, and you have to pop the wings out. Now these wings are pretty durable, so you can be pretty aggressive about popping it out. I think at first I was nervous I was going to rip the wing or hurt the material, but yes, you can just go ahead and pop it out pretty aggressively. It is not the easiest to pop off this this plastic that it comes in. So the way this wing looks is you actually have a little bit of a tab right here at the end. There's a side of it that's sort of opaque and a side of it that's sort of more flashy. So I've been tying the shiny side, pardon me, up and the more opaque side down, and you can sort of use lighting to see which side is which. So then you sort of take the 2 wings, stack them on top of each other, and bring the plastic tag ends together, just like so. Now what I've found in tying this fly is you have very little real estate on the hook shank, and you'll see that once we get going. But what I like to do here is trim this tag down a little bit. So once I've got them nice and even, I'll come in with the scissors and sort of clip the tag on one side and clip the tag on the other, and then cut that excess material out. And what that will do is leave you with 2 slightly thinner tags, which will make it a little bit easier to tie in a little bit, but also it'll help us not use as much real estate on the hook shank as I had mentioned a second ago. Clip that last little piece off. And then you kind of want to make sure you round the wing again. And that will help finish prep these bad boys for when we tie them in a second. Alright, so we'll put those wings off to the side. We'll go ahead and start our fly. So today we're using a Firehole sticks, Firehole 637 in size 22. And I was just talking with some of the boys in the shop about how with these hooks, you know, a 22 is probably closer to an 18 or even 16 in some of the other hook companies. But that's sort of the beauty of Firehole hooks, is that you're getting away with tying a 22 here, and you get a lot more real estate on the hook to do so. This is a barbless hook. It's a nice stout shank. It's really used for tying nymphs or eggs, but today we're going to use it for a dry fly. Here we have a uni thread in 8/0. This is dark blue. We're going to go ahead and put that on our right bobbin, and we're going to start right in the middle of the fly here. And you want to sort of start right at the tip of the hook, and that will help guide you later when we have to tie in the booby eyes. You need a little bit of space on the front of the hook before the eye. The first material we're going to be using is a Krystal flash. This is a Krystal flash in tan. And you do want to kind of try to find a little bit of a segment of Krystal flash that's slightly curved or completely straight. And we're going to go ahead and tie that in first. So sort of start it on the side of the hook that's a little bit closer to you, so that as you wrap, it pulls it up onto the top of the hook shank. You can throw one wrap underneath the back of the material and then wrap back forward to where you tied it in, clip out the excess. This part of the fly isn't 100% necessary, so if you want to skip this step, that's certainly fine. But I'd learned this technique from Max when he ties his RS3. But sticking a little bit of Krystal flash out the back certainly gives it a buggy look and another point of attraction for the fish when they're looking at it from underneath the surface film. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our tail. We want to make sure that when we're finished, this tail is sort of splaying up and back like that. So we're actually going to take the curve, put it so it's almost facing downward, and the material onto the side of the hook here, so that when you tie it in, it pulls it up onto the top of the shank. And you may need to do this a couple times. There's no shame in that. We want this fly to look proper when we're done, so we got to take the necessary time to do so. The other thing is to try to make sure that you don't have too much thread out there when you first start wrapping this onto the shank, and that will help you to be able to cinch it on there nicely. We'll start working backwards a little bit. And again, this part's pretty finicky, so it may take 2, 3, 4 times before you really place the material on the hook perfectly. That's okay. We're not in a race here. Alright, so now we'll put some tighter securing wraps on here. Work our way back to the front of the material, and then we can clip out any excess. Alright, finish that off, clean it up a little bit. One thing that I like to do at this point is take a little bit of this Loon UV resin in thin clear, and I'll take a little tiny bit, put it on top of the bodkin like this, and then I'll sort of take that tip and swipe it through the back here underneath the material and above the Krystal flash to create a little bead of UV resin behind here. If you didn't get enough the first time, get a little bit more on there. And what this will do is help us sort of set the materials exactly where we want them, and then give a little bit more durability to the back of the fly. So make sure your tail is in the direction that you want it, and the Krystal flash is sticking out the way you want it, and go ahead and hit that with the UV light. And we can go ahead and cure it a little bit more at the end of the tie, but you go ahead and hit it for a couple seconds just to set the materials, set that resin, and hold it together. You see that way when you let go, the tail and the Krystal flash stay in the right place. So now we're going to take a little bit of razor foam. This is actually razor foam in opaque blue. What we've done is taken a little strip of it, clipped off the ends to make it a little bit easier to tie in sort of a triangular shape. We'll go ahead and put it on the side of the hook facing you. Tighten our bobbin up a little, and then get some wraps in there to grab the material. You want to make sure that the foam is nice and flat along the back like that. And we'll go back about 1 millimeter, grab the material, and pull it over like so. And that starts to create a little bit of segmentation in the foam. We'll go back another millimeter, making sure not to crowd the area by the tail that we've already set correctly. Put in a couple more tighter wraps just to create these two little bumps here. Then we'll use those channels we've already created with the thread to advance it back forward to the middle of the fly. And at this point, we'll just pull over the foam a little bit. You can leave a little bit of a curve in the back like so, making sure that we have plenty of room between our tie-in point and the eye of the hook. Make sure that material is set nicely. And then we're going to put in a couple wraps right here to create sort of a landing spot for our wings and for our wing material. So this is where we're going to go ahead and grab our Hemingway's Stonefly wings that we've already prepped. Make sure that we have the right side facing up. We'll lay those down over the hook shank and start to tie it in that landing spot that we just created. And you'll see that splays the wings up nicely over the tail. And then we can go ahead and clip out the excess tag material here, right next to the thread wraps. You have to take the time to clean it up a little bit. It's important to do at this step. Well, those are tied in nice and solid. So now we can grab the next material. This is actually polypro yarn in white, but you can also use the sparkle emerger yarn in white or tan or cream or really any color. But the white is kind of nice once that flies, 30, 40 feet away from you on the surface, to be able to see something. So we'll go ahead and tie that material in, usually about halfway. You can fold that material over, grab it, and that will make the wing a little bit thicker. Perfect. And don't worry if there's a little bit of polypro yarn sticking out here. We're actually going to come back to this portion of the fly in a little bit. So now we'll pull back the foam, advance the thread to just behind the eye of the hook. And this is really the most challenging part of this tie, is adding the eyes. So in this case, we're going to use a yellow foam cylinder. This is in 1/16. And typically these are used for posts on dry flies, but in this case we're going to use it for the eyes. So what I like to do here is take a little bit of Zap-A-Gap and put it on the middle of the foam post right here. And then we're going to go ahead and stick that foam in right here. Hold it back for a second. Let that cure a little bit. And then start to pull the material forward. This is where it's really important to have real estate between the eye of the hook and where you just finished off the wing. So we'll put a couple wraps in there, make sure that the material all looks correct, and then put a couple more to secure it. But certainly that Zap-A-Gap is really going to solidify this head part and make sure that the foam post doesn't pull out of there. We can go ahead and take a couple more wraps, and then we're actually going to advance the thread behind the foam eyes while we work on the next part. And this is where I was saying you can sort of fill in the gaps and cover up any polypro yarn that might be sticking out with a couple more thread wraps here. So what we're going to do is take this front tag end of foam, razor foam material, and we're going to clip it about a millimeter and a half from the front of the hook eye. And we're going to kind of clip the edges off to triangulate it a little bit. And we take a little tiny dab of Zap-A-Gap, pop it in right here, and then either using your scissors or your whip finisher, you're going to fold over the material and stick it to the front of the head, just like so. You'll notice that on the natural damsels, they have kind of a bigger head and a bigger front portion of the head, so this technique kind of mimics that pretty well. Alright, so now we can sort of trim our eyes down. So what we're going to do here, and I'll turn it this way so you can see it a little bit better, is we're going to just sort of trim it relatively close, but you still want them sticking out a little bit. Like so. Try to make it nice and symmetrical, so even clip on the other side. Just like that. And you'll see from the top side or the bottom side of the head that the eyes are protruding out the side and the head looks relatively like a natural. So the last thing we're going to do here before we advance to behind the eye of the hook and whip finish is we're going to tie in some leg material. So we're actually using this super hair here in black. They also have a Wapsi version of this called Supreme hair, which really they're both pretty similar. When you see the material, see there's some sort of crimped portions of the hair and there's portions of it that are straight. So what you'll want to do is take a clump of really anywhere from 6 to 10 pieces of hair, and you'll want to pull out any of the hairs that are a little straighter. I think it gives it a buggier look when you're using the crimp material versus the hairs that are a little straighter. And you don't want too much super hair because we're really just imitating the couple legs that the damselfly has towards the front. So we'll go ahead and flip over the fly in our vise here. Lay the material along the body like so. I like to hold it with my thumb in the back so I can grab my bobbin and come in with a couple wraps. Maybe a lighter wrap so you can place the material exactly where you want on the shank. And then come in and fill it with some securing wraps. And really it doesn't matter if you're building up a little bit of body here because it sort of narrows the gap between the eyes and the back of the fly here. And we're going to fill it in a little bit later with some UV resin anyway. So we'll clip off the super hair right towards the back here. Put in a couple more wraps. Cover up the black part of the super hair and make sure the underside of the fly is nice and blue. Then we can start advancing the thread forward. So at this point I like to take the super hair and pull it back. You can either put it around some of the screws that you have on your vise, or you can use a clip to hold the material back. In this case, just to demonstrate that, we're going to put the material along the tail here, grab a little clip. In this case it's just a clip from a Bose headphones cord, and then we can start to advance the thread to behind the eye of the hook. Alright, now this is, the other crux to this fly is making sure that some of that Zap-A-Gap hasn't gotten in there, that you create a little bit of space between the head and the eye, and then we're going to go ahead and whip finish. Really, you can only lay one down. A lot of people will use a technique where they just use their fingertip or they use a bodkin to just drop a couple securing wraps under there, but we'll go ahead and use a traditional whip finish tool. Sort of the technique there is create your figure 4, come out a little bit, and really wedge that wrap in behind the eye. Don't worry about on this side, wedge it in, and then of course pop it off the bottom part of the whip finisher and pull it through tight. Now we can go ahead and take our clip off the material in the back. We can clip out the tag end of the thread as close as we can to the shank of the hook or to the eye of the hook. And then we can trim our legs to size. So I like to pull it down just like this till the material is basically touching the tip of the hook, and cut it off about there. And you can sort of push on those fibers to crimp them up, and that gives them a real natural look. You'll notice when damselflies land, they put their legs forward and they come down onto a stick right on those front legs, you know, with the rest of the body sticking up backwards. So last thing we're gonna do here is take a little bit of our Loon UV clear resin and hit the bottom of this fly with it, just to make sure it's nice and durable. And we'll also hit that thread near where we whip finished. Not too much, just a drop or so. Kind of move those legs out of the way, right on the tip of the fly. Make sure it's not in the eye of the hook. Usually like to keep a piece of paper towel near me so I can wipe off my bodkin every time I use it, and then use the tip of it to clear out the eye of the hook. Last step, go ahead and hit it with that UV flashlight. Let it cure for a little bit. Remember to cure that UV at the back. Give it a couple seconds. All right, and that's a finished adult booby damselfly. So as you can see, it has a lot of the features of a natural. These wings sort of sit up on the surface film, while the tail sort of lays either on the surface film or just under it. And then of course the foam eyes and the foam front of the body keeps that part of the fly up over the film. And you'll be surprised, with this one you'll definitely get some aggressive takes. So I like to fish this fly as a single dry. As soon as I see any damselflies around the edge of the Stillwater or the slow portion of the river, and I see risers, this is a great go-to. It's a nice hearty meal, nice hearty snack for those trout. So it gets them pretty aggressive and moving on this fly, sometimes from 3, 4, 5 feet away. So that's the Adult Booby Damsel. I'm at AvidMax. This is Fly Tying Tuesday. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a wonderful day.